All right. Good evening, or good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to Leisrealtalk. I moved the live stream program another 30 minutes earlier because I like to. It's part of my New Year resolution. I like to start my day early and finish early. So we're going to be doing the live program at 9 p.m. Eastern time now. All right. So today's program is mind-boggling. We'll uncover some myths together. I have been working on these numbers all day. Um, so, China's total number of COVID deaths is a myth. So is the country's demographic data. The Chinese Communist regime claims that China has 1.4 billion people, but various experts have questioned it. Some claim that China's total population is only as low as 800 million. Beijing recently announced the total number of COVID-related deaths in Chinese hospitals for the past few weeks since December 8th was only 60,000, but nobody believed that data. So in the past several days, the number of COVID deaths in China has been in the news. And then China's demographics, China's population is also in the news. I have a subscriber asking me about the declining Chinese population. But I never thought that the two can be related, but they are. So the question is, how many people have died since Beijing eased zero COVID? And how many people have died since the beginning of the pandemic? And what's the impact of that on Chinese population? So let's first talk about how many people have died since China relaxed the COVID policy in early December. Various public health experts have said that China has infection rate as high as 90%. Beijing has no problem of reviewing that number, but has been very, very quiet, mysterious about the number of deaths. So under pressure last week, do I have a slide? I do have a slide. Last week, Beijing released this number, 59,000, almost 60,000, right? So that's the total number of deaths in hospitals from December 8th, 2022 to January 12th. And of which 5,503 is related to COVID-induced respiratory function or lung function failure. And then whereas the majority of that, 90%, is complications from other diseases. So no one believes this data because China's overcrowded hospitals and long waiting time at the crematoriums give us a different reality. And we've also heard that local governments have been using like seafood and meat freezer storage space as temporary mortuaries. And we also have learned that multiple bodies are cremated together now, and cost of coffins and urns have grown up from 5 to 10 times. So how many people have died, right? So you have various, social media posts from China this one claims that the death rate is 10 times higher than normal times in Qingdao. And this one went viral. A Chinese said that she was born in 1983. And as of January 3rd, 2023, 6 of her families, her grandparents on both mother and father's side, her mother and father, 6 of them all died, and she's the only one left alone. And then this post is from the daughter of Bao Tong. Bao Tong, I mentioned her a couple of weeks ago. Her father was an advisor to former CCP leader Zhao Ziyang, who was removed from power during the 1989 student movement, pro-democracy movement. So her father already died. This is his daughter. So she said this. She said, hundreds of thousands died in Beijing in a month, but the city government is banging drums for a commendation conference. Yes, Beijing had a kind of a celebration event to or a award ceremony, shall we say, to commend the successful campaign against COVID last week. And people call that shameless because so many people are still dying. And how could the regime be celebrating, calling it a success? So she said that in less than a month, 17 of her family and friends have died. And she has not seen anything like it in her life. And she posted on Twitter, and then there's a response. The first response said, from the person, James Lee, said, I'm in Beijing. Your number may be understated. I think it's got to be 1 million. And then Ms. Bao responded, she said, I don't have actual data, but according to the fact that funeral homes are packed, burning multiple corpses in one furnace with waiting time several days or even a dozen times longer, the emergency system is paralyzed and hospital morgue is full. Everything is in short supply, blah, blah, blah. So when I was reading that, I was thinking, is there any way we could quantify that? Because we've been reading this kind of news for the past, 3 weeks now, since late December, right? So it's at least 3 weeks we've been seeing these news of people can cremate their families, who passed away, all these, and skyrocketing funeral service costs. So we've been watching this for weeks. But can we quantify that? What is the actual death? If we could use some basic numbers. So that's what I was thinking that I'm trying to do. So I look. And there are some numbers, right? For example, this one this is kind of an industry analysis of China's what do you call that? Funerals industry. Is there such an industry? Funeral service industry. And so it's a kind of an analysis. And this article has some very interesting charts. So for example, this one shows the growth, the number of companies registered or in service the number of companies related to funeral services that are registered by year. You see the trend, you see the growth, right? And particularly after 2019, the growth, the growth from 2018 to 2019 is 19.35%, and then it grew like 29.97%, and it grew another 37%. So it's pretty dramatic. And then it's kind of went down 2022. And this is also an interesting chart. We'll be referring to this chart later. So this is the percentage of the deceased that were cremated. You see how it has gone up. So 59% of the people who passed away were cremated, but before that this number was more like 50%. I talked to someone who's in this, who's very familiar with this industry, and he told me it has always been 1-to-1. So you have like half of the people who were buried and half of the people who are cremated, but those who are buried are mostly in the rural area, in the poor regions. People in the urban area are almost all cremated unless they're wealthy and can afford a burial place. So, and I come up with some assumptions. Okay, so can I show myself? Oh, it's gonna. Okay, so I'm gonna remove myself. Okay, so here oh, my logo again. Cut some numbers off. All right, I need to move the place of my logo next time. So here are some my basic assumptions. These are the foundation of my numbers. Okay, so we have the number of incinerators. These are actual number. Okay, from the Ministry of Civil Affairs. So 2022 is the same as 2021. The number that's cut off, it's 7043. It's the same as 2021. So I calculated the growth in incinerators. It's not that much. And then the number of funeral related companies, you see how much it has grown. And then the growth is much more significant. These are the numbers I read from the chart that I showed you earlier. I just put them in this spreadsheet. And then another assumption that we need to make is how many, so these are the total number of incinerators that China has, right? And then the other assumption is how many bodies each incinerator cremates per day, assuming they're running 24 hours a day, because that's what they're running. They're running at full capacity now, 24 hours a day. So the calculation varies, but on average, in normal time, it's 45 minutes to 90 minutes. But now I've seen the amount of time is being reduced to 15 minutes. It's just a very ugly situation. Yeah, they don't entirely burn down the body, and then they kind of to save time. And then, but anyways, so I took a very conservative approach. I assume like 1 hour. Each machine, each incinerator burns one body, 1 hour each, being very conservative in a normal situation. But in China, they've been practicing this thing. They put two bodies in each incinerator to save time. So that would double that. So that's 48. And in some cases, they put 3 in 1. The maximum capacity is 3 in 1. That's the maximum weight allowed. So they've been doing so for example, for Beijing, they have been talking about the average number of bodies each incinerator burns is 50. So that's at least 2 in 1 and running at 24 hours a day. Okay. So that's the assumption. And then average waiting time. Okay. So we've been seeing, like the most I've seen is like 1.5 months. It's fully booked. You have to wait a month to 1.5 months in some places in Shanghai. But like a week is like a very typical wait time, 7 days. The shortest time maybe 3 days. But to be conservative, again, we want to be conservative, right? So I assume a national average of 5 days waiting time. And also I plotted the cremation to burial ratio is 6:4. Okay, so with that, then we can calculate some basic numbers. So daily maximum cremation capacity at national level, if we assume 1 in 1, meaning one body in one incinerator, the total is 169,000. If we assume 2 in 1, it's doubling that. If it's 3 in 1, then it's tripling that. Okay. So I call the normal the 1 in 1 base case scenario, the 2 in 1 average scenario, and then the 3 in 1 kind of a worst case scenario. And then since December 8 to now, there are 42 days. So if you just multiply everything together, right? So assuming there's no extra government help, meaning that there has not been extra incinerators built throughout China. We're just using existing incinerators, using existing capacity. And assuming they're running at full capacity, which they are, and assuming the average wait time is five days. So total number of death, or total number of bodies that have been cremated since December 8th. Of course, this is an average. There's a build-up time. So if we assume best case scenario, meaning they burn one body at a time, which is not what's happening, we would have seen 35 million deaths. Okay, if we assume 2 in 1, we would have seen 70 million deaths, and the worst is 106 million. And this is not everything. This is only cremation. So if you assume the 6:4 ratio, because people in rural area don't go for cremation, it's too expensive. So if you're adding the burials, so total number of deaths based on the three scenarios are as shown. And that's shocking. That's very shocking to me. Um, Assuming the average scenario, it's 118 million number of deaths for the past 42 days in China, based on everything we've seen on social media, based on our conversations to our family, friends in China and everything. And this assumption does not include the extra capacity that the government is sending by sending in these mobile incinerators, and then they're building these extra um, furnace to burn the bodies. So we're not even considering that. And it's just, these numbers bother me, and it's just unthinkable. So how can it be possible, right? How can it be possible? This is the question I ask. Um, Now, the founder of Falun Gong is the spiritual practice that the CCP has been persecuting for the past 20 years. The founder of Falun Gong, Mr. Li Hongzhi, who has not been saying anything for the most part in the past 20 years, um, said on the 15th, I think this information came out on the 17th, uh, that over 400 million people have died of COVID in China in the past 3+ years, and the total death toll will reach 500 million. And it's shocking. It's just very shocking. But then the numbers are in line with what I have calculated, right? So so it just so I can't stop there. I have to do more digging and verification to find out, is it 400 million? Where did the 400 million come from? And what does my 100 million, in the past 42 days mean? So I have to, it has to all come, it has to make sense to me, right? So the question I ask is, how many Chinese died from COVID before December 8th? So first I want to separate into two stages. Before December 8th, right, when China exercised the infamous zero COVID policy, and then after December 8th, the number I came up with, 118 million, was after December 8th. So I asked myself, what was the number before December 8th? First thing, so I went to Wuhan. I want to take a look at what happened in Wuhan. And I found all these news related to the casualties during the Wuhan outbreak. And this AP coverage, it was from 2020, March 2020, basically, how to say, there were a lot of internet discussions on Chinese social media about the number of Chinese cell phone users dropped by 21 million within 2 months in January and February of 2020, which were the first 2 months of the pandemic. And Epoch Times reported it, but there were a lot of kind of social media discussions. And so AP, I think some Western mainstream media, attributed it as false. So it has a fact check. I highlight it as the facts. Major cell phone carriers in China reported a loss of nearly 21 million subscribers in January and February as virus, whatever. So it calls it false, and the source, the rationale, is the Chinese cell phone carriers. But we know the Chinese cell phone carriers are all state-owned. Of course, the Chinese state-owned companies would say that's a rumor. So the fact that Western media used a state-owned cell phone carrier to dispel the rumor or the claim was rather ridiculous. And if you look at their coverage of China's COVID outbreak now, they're all quoting social media sources now. So 3 years ago, Epoch Times was doing that, and they call that false. And now all mainstream media quote, claims on Chinese social media as sources. So look what 3 years have done. So first of all, okay, so maybe this 21 million loss of cell phone users are true, right? And here's another. Here's the famous. I have to remove myself. Here's a famous Wuhan writer, Fang, whose diary became famous. It's called Wuhan Diary. It's a daily account of life during the Wuhan lockdown. She shared a picture sent by a doctor friend, a pile of cell phones from those who died from COVID. And it said, with a caption that said, unowned cell phones on the floor of a funeral home. Their owners had been turned into ashes. Again, the Chinese authorities came out to discredit the picture, saying that they're not from funeral homes. But that was a very powerful picture that we saw in early months of 2020. And then this woman, Teresa Hannon, I don't know how you say her last name, Bazaki. She was born in New York to an American father and a Chinese mother. And when she was 2 years old, she was sent back to her grandmother in China. And so she grew up in China with her Chinese grandmother. And so her native language is Chinese. She lived in China for some 30 years, and she came to the United States. I don't know if it's late 1970s or early 80s, but it's right around that time. And in one of her recent interviews with the Chinese language media, she said that she has a lot of contacts in China. I mean, she grew up there, right? So Chinese is her native language, uh, so she's probably like me, who speaks English with a little bit accent. Anyway, but no accent when speaking Chinese. But anyways, so she said that her friend in Wuhan sent her an encrypted message saying that the infection rate during the Wuhan outbreak was 2/3. 2/3 of the people were infected, and a quarter died. So the city, Wuhan had 11 million population, so a quarter of that would be about 2.5 million people. So that's one thing. And here's a picture of reported by a Shanghai newspaper. This is a mobile incinerator built by a state-owned company that builds a shipyard. And they call this mobile medical trash and animal body disposal quarter, heck, whatever equipment, or yeah. So that's, it says it's for medical trash and animal bodies. Okay. And then according to the Chinese media, its temperature is as high as 800 Celsius. It can cremate a human body in less than a minute. It has a capacity of 5 tons, which is 5,000 kilograms. And between 40 to 60 such units were sent to Wuhan. And I calculated, based on these calculation, the daily capacity. It can burn between up to 100,000 to 120,000 bodies in a day, uh, based on these numbers. So if it doesn't have that high of a casualty, why would Wuhan needs this kind of units, right? I mean, you don't have that many animals to kill. Where did Wuhan have that many animals to kill during the outbreak? So it was obviously not for animals. It was to dispose human bodies. And there's another post. This one actually showed the picture on these things on site, and um, it says the simple incinerator cannot filter sulfur dioxide, and it reminds people should monitor this the sulfur dioxide in the air in Wuhan. Um, so I thought maybe people in China should monitor that, in cities, in urban areas where there are a lot of casualties, and see if, this chemical in the air, is high. Um, so then that brings the next question. If we did see that much casualties in Wuhan, um, why didn't people notice it? Well, the CCP, the regime has been doing everything it can to hide it from people. If you think about it, now it seems to make sense why Xi Jinping is so stubborn with the zero COVID policy. If you think about it, you think it didn't make sense when China have such low incidence. If it didn't have so much casualties, why would he waste so much resources, you know, at the cost of killing the economy, just have everybody locked down? It just doesn't make sense. But the truth of the fact is, the China had a lot of casualties in the early days of the outbreak, particularly in cities like Wuhan or maybe nearby areas. And then I think that the pandemic, the casualty continued. It never went away. It continued. And that's why Xi Jinping is so stuck on the zero COVID policy. But the government hide it so well, because the way Chinese society is built upon, it's hard for people to notice the massive number of deaths. And I'll explain that, why people didn't notice it. So for example, so how many people died before December 8th, 2022, right? So let's say how many days we have from December 15th to December 8th. There's 1,088 days of COVID. And China has an area of 9.6 million square kilometers, right? If one COVID death occurs in an area of 35 square kilometers per day, every day, and 35 square kilometers is the size of Macau, roughly, or it's about 3/4 of the size of Providence, Rhode Island. So let's say one death occurs in that area per day in China for the past 1,088 days. You would have 300 million deaths before December 8th. And would you notice one death per day in an area the size of Macau? Well, you may say, well, Macau is a busy city. If you have 100 people die in Macau, you wouldn't notice it. But China's, a lot of it area is rural area. Yeah, let's just say half of China's land is inhabitable. So let's cut it in half, right? So you have 2 people die per day. If you have 2 people die per day in the area the size of Macau for 3 years on the land of 9.6 million square kilometers, would you notice it? You still wouldn't notice it. So 300 million accumulative death before December 8th, technically or mathematically, is possible. Of course, it varies from region to region, but it's totally possible. Another way to look at this is China has 2,851 counties and close to 40,000 townships. If 7 COVID deaths occurs in a township per day, that would be that will also be 300 million accumulative death before December 8th. Again, would you notice if 7 people died in a town every day in China? I don't think so. I don't think people would notice that. Now, let me talk about who are the people, right? So this is a study, a demographic and income study by the Institute of Economics and Social Research of Jinan University. And this is a chart. This is the column on the left is monthly income. So the lowest is below 500 yuan. I circle it up to about 1,090 yuan per month. And then the first percentage is the percentage of the people. So for example, there are 15% people that makes 500 yuan a month or lower in China. And there's another 14.43% people that makes 500 to 800 yuan. And then the column, two columns across, the second column on the right, from the right is the cumulative percentage. So if you look at you have total of 43%, 42.85% of people, which is roughly 599 million people making monthly income of 1,090 yuan or lower. So 600 million, this is according to Chinese official population. I mean, the real number may not be, I mean, proportionally, it may be lower if we say China doesn't have 1.4 million. But let's just say 600 million making this little money. Now, 1,000 yuan is like less than $150 a month. Okay. And that's very poor in China. I don't think these are the people who are active on social media. I don't even know if they have a cell phone, or even if they do, is the cell phone a smartphone? These are the people who are very poor, and then I think they live. I don't think with that kind of income they can afford themselves to live in the urban area. They're mostly in the rural area, and if they die, very sadly, I don't think the Chinese society would notice it. This is a very dire situation, very sad scenario. If a big percentage of this 600 million people who make 1,000 yuan or less a month die, the entire nation, or at least its media, its social media, would not notice it at all. Nobody would talk about it because these people are at the very bottom social strata, and you don't even notice their existence. So that just tells me, it is possible. What I'm saying, my point is, if you look at all the numbers I've shown you, I've calculated, it is possible that 300 million people died in China from the beginning of the pandemic up until December 8th. And they're mostly people in the lower social strata. And of course, I think it's front-end loaded. So when the pandemic first broke out, there were more casualties in the front end, and then it might have gradually died down. But the pandemic, people kept dying from COVID, and that's why Xi Jinping insisted on zero COVID, because it never went away. People never stopped dying. So 300 million is possible. So this is going back to Mr. Li Hongzhi's claim that 400 million people have died as of now from the very beginning of the COVID. It is, all possible, right? If you look at all the numbers. So then that comes to the next question. Is there any way we could verify this? I think it's impossible to have a list of people who died in the past 3 years, because there's just no such record. I think the only way we can verify this is to find out how many people are alive today in China. If we could find out how many people are alive now, then we know how many are gone. Then we know the real casualty of COVID. So that brings us to the next question. What's China's population now? Right? That's what I said. It's related. I never thought that these two topics are the same topic, but they are now. So what is China's population now? Remember this incident back in, I think, July last year? There was an anonymous internet user identified as China Dan who posted on the hacker forum, breach forums, offering to sell a database containing information on 1 billion Chinese nationals, right, including their name, address, birthplace, phone numbers, and even criminal cases involving them. And the database has 970 million records. And RFA, Radio Free Asia, reported that reported a possible source of the leak is when programmers using an enterprise search engine called Elasticsearch. When programmers use Elasticsearch server for the Shanghai Municipal Public Security Bureau, let me remove myself, to build a big data search system, they or he or whoever was doing it, the programmer, backed up the data on Ali Cloud, but made a mistake, leaving the data backdoor wide open and making it viewable and downloadable. Elasticsearch is the most popular enterprise search engine, and a Chinese IT person said that in order to use Elasticsearch, the user needs to send complete data to Elasticsearch so that it can provide joint indexing and search functions on all nodes in order to meet the Shanghai Public Security Bureau's requirement for a full intelligent search. So basically, he's saying that the techie is saying that it's unlikely that the database uploaded to Ali Cloud by the Shanghai Public Security Bureau is partial data of Chinese population. It must be complete Chinese population data. And in that case, they believe that the 970 million records are the total population of China in 2022. Of course, they might have removed some government officials, like high-ranking government officials, or some key people, but they may also have some redundant data because they're Chinese. Even the 970 million could be an overstated number because Chinese like to have more than one IDs, and also sometimes the local government like to have fictitious records. The more population, the larger your population is, the more government funds that you could receive from the central government. So, but they believe that the 970 million records is the entire population of China. And this gentleman, his name is Yi Fuxian. He's a scientist in OBGYN research at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He's also an expert on China demographic data and author of a book called Big Country with an Empty Nest. He reviewed the 750,000 sampling data of the data leak. And he wrote this on July 27th. This is the article he wrote. And he said, after reviewing the data sampling, he said, that means China's real population is not 1.4 billion and could be even smaller than my own estimate of 1.28 billion. Because Mr. Yi has always been disputing CCP's data of 1.4 billion. He had previously stated that China's population was 1.28 billion. But after seeing that 750,000 data records, he's saying that the actual population is even lower than that. Okay, so there are also research that Radio Free Asia reported that Russians have done an analysis and found that the total Chinese population was only 800 million. And Japanese researchers have done research and calculated based on salt consumption, right? The amount of salt people consume in China. And Japanese also calculated that the total population in China was around 800 million. Now, these studies were before 2019. I think they came out before 2019, before the pandemic. But at the end of 2021 or the beginning of 2022, there was an incident where the China's Ministry of Public Security, their own records show that there were about 780 million ID cards in existence in China. And so this YouTube video, this is a YouTuber based from Hong Kong, speaking Cantonese. So basically, he made a video saying that, well, what the Russians estimated was correct. That China only has 800 million people, right? Because there's only 780 million ID cards in existence. We need to normalize that number because China does not require ID cards for people under the age of 16. So in theory, people under the age of 16 don't have a cards. And that's about 19% of the population. So if you divide the 780 million ID cards by the 81% of the people it represents, that means China's total at 100% of population, China's total population will be 960 million. So that matches exactly the 970 million records from the data leak. So there's no more than 970 million IDs or identities in China around the beginning of 2020, right? Not the 1.4 billion. So the actual number of people in China is already 400 million lower than the official Chinese number. You know why China spends so much effort to massage its demographics number? Because if it doesn't, it would show the real casualty of COVID. So that's why it massaged the data so well, so that so you cannot tell. So okay, so let me just summarize. So what have we come up with? After all these numbers and all these talks, so what is Lei saying? So what is the real COVID-related death in China? First of all, the CCP has clearly lied about total COVID in China. The regime has relied on zero COVID policy to control the outbreak and death. That's why it has been in place for so long, despite, public outcry. And large number of people died from quarantine camps and rural areas. They built so many quarantines. People were moved to quarantines, and eyewitnesses have been saying that people were removed from quarantines and they don't know where they were moved to, So, like for example, in the Shanghai built a quarantine camp that has a capacity of 50,000 people. So, what happened to everyone that were in quarantines? So that's one fact that we have not paid attention to. We only paid attention to, the big cities, where people are iPhones, smartphone savvy. They know how to, send viral videos to the internet. But we have not paid attention to rural areas, and low-income population is harder hit. And total casualties since December 8th may have reached 100 million based on the numbers I gave you. And then you see my assumptions are very, very conservative. I'm not, including the extra incinerators the governments are putting in. I'm assuming each incinerator burns one body at 1 hour per day, but the actuality is sometimes it's only 15 minutes. So I'm very conservative, but I come up with a number that's 118 million so far. And with the way things are going, people say, this wave will be will go on for another 2 months until it hit the rural area. So it's totally possible that we've seen another 100 million casualties until the pandemic is over, or I should say until this wave is over. So that's, these are the numbers I mean, these are the points that I've seen from the numbers. So China's real population, it does not have 1.4 billion people, period. Okay. Its population may be under 1 billion as of mid 2022. Total Chinese population, I'm being very conservative and cautious with what I say, maybe lower than 800 million by the end of the pandemic. I mean, according to the Russian study and the Japanese study, it's already under 800 million now. So I think the 970 million records has a lot of duplicates, because a lot of Chinese have more than one ID cards. So the fact that they have 970 million records does not mean they have 970 million people. I think the real number of people is much less than that. So if China has 900 million people in mid 2022, and now that we lost 1 million since December 8th, I mean, lost 100 million and another 100 million, that's 200 million. Are we talking about 700 million population for China? I cannot substantiate that, but I'm confident to say that it's going to be around 800 million is a much safer number to say. So with that, I say this analysis is mind-boggling. And all right, that ends my presentation. How come I don't see any comments today? Do we turn it on today? I don't see any comments today. And this is the first. Is that because we turn it? I don't know how. I set it up in a rush. But anyways, I thank you very much for your time. And I hope this is helpful. It's very sad. It is very sad. I worked on these numbers and I looked at from left to right, and it is what it is. I think it made a big difference when you try to put everything together. And I was a financial analyst. I like to build models to quantify things. And of course, it's only one approach. There are many different approaches that you can do this. And I urge other people that have better resources or better understanding of the real outbreak to do similar quantification. And also urge government. Lei, you turn off comments? I didn't turn off comments. Oh, I don't know what happened. Oh, it's the comments are here. I I have no idea. So I think with the technology we have, satellite and all the technology, it's not hard. We need to find out how many people are in China. It's impossible to find out how many people died. What I have calculated is just hypothetical calculation. It's impossible to calculate. The only thing that could help us is to find out how many people are living in China today. If we could have that number, then we know how CCP has lied, how many people have died. And I think with today's technology, it's not hard to find out. With satellite and, if we can monitor how many cell phones, how many mobile users are in China, I think we should be able to find out how many people are in China today. So with that said, let me see, do I have any questions? Okay, I don't see any questions. I'll end it here. It is troubling to see these numbers, but we cannot fool ourselves. This is human lives that we're talking about. If another 100 million people would die from now until the end of the pandemic, that's too many lives. So at least we need to know what's happening in China. And I hope everyone who has the means to do something. That's all. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Good night.